You very much, Jasmine, and I should, I guess, say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dependent on where you are in the world. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and I am going to present to you a bit of a controversial argument, actually. I hope that it will provoke some discussion and debate, and I am indeed live, coming to you from my study in Oxfordshire. Very cold, grey and foggy morning here. Now I'm going to attempt the first feat of the day, which is to share my screen with you. Right, just give me a chance to get onto slideshow. Okay, so there is some fascinating research that shows from stab vests to the size of our mobile phones to crash test dummies. The world is basically designed for men. Women are the majority of the global population, but by no means the dominant force. And this rings true in our world, the law, where in the UK at the least, women make up more than half of practicing lawyers, but only 31% of us are partners, and an even smaller number are business owners. Curious, despite literally decades of women being the majority of new entrants into the law, why weren't we getting to the top in anything like equal numbers? I wanted to get to grips with this when I became president of the Law Society of England and Wales. So together with thousands of men and women across the world, we investigated why. We conducted the largest ever global survey and completed 250 roundtables in 19 countries to discover why female lawyers were not getting to positions of seniority which were commensurate with our desires, our knowledge, our experience, and our sheer numbers. And what did we find? Systemic bias. I'd assumed that the lives of women lawyers across the globe would differ wildly, but our research found that the challenges and the experiences of female lawyers around the world are very similar. We face social and cultural expectations about how we should behave and what we can and should do because we are female in every country. This gender stereotyping prejudiced working women, particularly those who had children, and prevented capable, excellent, committed women from realising their potential. And how wrong is it in the year in which marked the centenary of women being able to become lawyers in the UK? Before that, we weren't considered to be persons within the relevant law, but I digress, that's another story. How wrong is it today that anyone is not able to progress due to their gender, their race, or any other protected characteristic? Surely we must all agree that talent is equally spread and that everyone should have the same chances and opportunities as everyone else. But in our esteemed profession, we found that not to be the case for women. And I know the law is not alone in this. Let's remember that the equal pay gap in the UK stands at 17.3%. And that's despite us having a law in place for the last 50 years, making it illegal to pay men and women differently for the same work. Nonetheless, today, our male colleagues could have stopped work on the 14th of November, and we have to go all the way through to the 31st of December to earn the same. This is all really concerning, but what I want to focus on is how it could get an awful lot worse. Most of us live in the hope and the expectation that things will improve with the greater use of technology, that computers are objective, non-biased, fair, and that their decisions can be relied on. However, I'm worried that as we move to an increasingly automated, data-driven world where the computer decides almost everything, all the bias that we know exists could be hardwired into our future decision-making. Bias, frankly, blights our world. It makes it an unfair and an unkind place for people who aren't from the dominant culture. And this includes women, people of colour, and the disabled, just to name a few. So the stakes are high, and the not too distant future could be really scary. I'll explain why I think this. First of all, let's understand how a computer makes decisions. The computer is programmed with a set of instructions called algorithms. The algorithms are fed on information so that they can learn and understand. They are then able to apply themselves, the instructions, to any other information and come up with recommendations and answers. Well, what's wrong with that, you may ask? All seems perfectly fair, reasonable, objective, etc. But there are two big problems here. Firstly, with how the algorithms are trained and by whom, and secondly, the information, the data that they are fed on. Picture a computer programmer. Bet you're not thinking of someone who looks like me, and you would be right. According to the latest Office of National Statistics data, of the nearly 1 million people employed in IT in the UK, only 18% are female. In the US, in Silicon Valley, white men represent over 80% of executives. So the majority of the people who are writing the programs and their bosses all come from one particular group. And this can lead to serious blind spots and potential bias. And just like stab vests and cars that are designed for men's bodies, this can be really dangerous for people who don't come from that dominant group. The second problem relates to the information, the data that's been used to train the algorithms. Let me give you a couple of examples. The first is now really quite famous. Amazon, as a tech company, quite understandably wanted to use technology to ensure they got the best candidates for the top jobs. So they started to use algorithms to sort through CVs. But the algorithms were trained on information from CVs received from the ultimately successful candidates over the last decade. Because the tech industry is dominated by men, most of those CVs were from men, and the algorithm learned that being male equated with success and started to downgrade the women. So if you had captain of the hockey team on your CV, that might be looked upon favourably. But if it said captain of the women's hockey team, then it was probably destined for the bin. Women did not represent successful candidates as there were so few women in top positions, and therefore the system started to reinforce this. It's known as algorithmic bias. Thankfully, Amazon stopped using that system when they understood the consequences, but surely some damage must have been done. I'll give you another example from my own experience. I chaired a commission which looked into the use of algorithms in the criminal justice system in the UK. We found that they're being used widely by police forces all over the country for things like facial recognition. So that's when a face in a crowd, and it could be your face or anyone else's face, is cross-referenced against a watch list. And predictive crime mapping. Do you remember that Tom Cruise film, Minority Report, where the role of the police was to prevent crimes from happening? Well, this is actually very similar. An algorithm is used to work out where police officers should be deployed to detect more crimes. But this can create real risk to fairness and promote discrimination. Doesn't take a genius to work out that the more police officers you put in one place, the more crimes they are going to detect there. The use of the algorithm becomes self-reinforcing. And as there's no true way to measure crime in our society, only proxies such as convictions, or even more problematically, individuals arrested. And as it's commonly accepted that in the criminal justice system, it polices certain populations, then these biases are reflected in the information that the algorithm uses. This creates a real threat to our basic human rights. So if you add the possible bias in the programmers, and believe me, every single one of us holds our own set of biases, but that's another talk, together with the bias in the information that is used to train the algorithms, which reflects the past and the current bias of our societies, and finally, the growing body of research that confirms that human beings may lack the confidence and the knowledge to question or override algorithmic recommendations. And you could end up with a perfect storm. A world where increasing numbers of decisions are being made by unchecked computers based on information that discriminates against sections of our society in a way which none of us would want, but where there is no one who is willing or able to say the computer is wrong. My call to action is to make sure that we do not sleepwalk into this dystopian nightmare. There's another future we could have, one where if we get it right, we could reduce or even remove all the bias that blights our current decision making, where computers can do the heavy lifting for us, but in a way that is right and fair and good. And as lawyers and those involved in the legal industry, we need to be part of the solution to make sure that our increasingly computerized and automated world can actually start to eradicate bias, not hardwire it into our futures. So I'm up for this. And I hope you are too. Thank you very, very much for listening. I'll see if there are any questions. Okie dokie, we've got one here, I think, from an anonymous attendee, but Nottingham Law Society, so there's a bit of a clue there, has only had 6 female presidents in the entirety of its close to 150 years. I understand you've done much in your presidency to help put more women in leadership in law. My question is, would you say that that is the best way that we as greater legal communities can help our own countries, communities or firms? Really, really interesting question. Thank you, Anonymous. So what's the best way that we can help? Well, the research that we did, as I said, is the largest ever piece of global research, 250 roundtables, and we produced 3 research reports, and I'm very happy to send those out to anybody who wants to see them. But the things that we found really shifted the dial in terms of addressing the barriers for women getting into leadership positions. And indeed, I was the fifth female president of the Law Society of England and Wales out of 174. So the National Law Society hasn't done a great deal better than Nottingham, that's for sure. But the things that made real difference was addressing unconscious bias. That's a huge, huge issue. Making sure that men see this as an issue for them, that they are engaged as being accountable and responsible for gender equality, because all of the research, not just our research, but there's a huge amount of research from McKinsey, Deloitte, etc., which evidences that gender equality and diversity equates with profitability. So it's definitely in business's interest to have many more diverse decision makers. Things like having really good role models, mentors, and people who are there to sponsor not just women, but anybody from a protected characteristic. To help and support them into leadership positions, and making sure that diversity and inclusion is at the very, very heart of business decision making. Now, these are all what I might term analog solutions for an analog world, but they are incredibly important. The one final thing I would say is that the very last piece of work that we did when it came to the Women in Leadership programme was together with all of the representative bodies in the UK, and with the support of our government, we put together a Women in Law pledge. Now, any law firm or any legal department, or actually any organisation that signs up to that pledge, will be part of a progressive future, really addressing the key issues that mean that there isn't a level playing field at the moment in our profession. So again, please do sign up to the pledge. I'll put a link to all these documents in the chat. Oh, right, we've got a few more questions here. Excellent. So how do lawyers who don't know how to navigate technology help with this? Really good question. I think the main thing there is about awareness raising. So if you know that there's software, there are programs that are being used in your legal department, in your law firm, in your business, that utilize algorithms, machine learning, natural language processing, then I think it's a really good idea to ask the questions. You know, has this technology been checked to make sure that the data that is being utilized is fair and non-biased? Can we be reassured, particularly, I think, hiring algorithms is where there's been a huge amount of concern. Can we be reassured that the use of technology actually promotes our values of diversity and inclusion? So that I would suggest is one way that people can do that. So another question: for countries with a strong cultural gender bias against women, how would you approach this conversation to create change? From a female lawyer in a conservative country. Okay. Yeah, I think what I have found to be useful with people and cultures where there is a resistance perhaps to gender equality is to do two things. Firstly, to put together the hard-nosed business case. And as I say, McKinsey have done some fantastic long-term research around this, where they have evidenced absolutely conclusively that gender equality and having more women in senior positions actually supports the profitability and the success of the business. So that usually has an impact. I think secondly, many of the world's biggest buyers of legal services are now demanding information and data from the law firms themselves about their gender, not just their gender, but their diversity and inclusion policies. They want to know who's working on their cases. They want to make sure that there is an alignment between the values of the business and the values of the law firm, and that can be evidenced by the law firm. So again, this is something that that usually is a bit of a light bulb moment for senior men in organisations, where they think, gosh, if our clients are demanding it, then we probably better do it. And thirdly, I think, perhaps to start with the knowledge and hopefully support of your business and a networking group, to start to build the community. Invite men. Men are allies. Some of the very, very best supporters of gender equality are men. And believe me, sometimes when a man says something, it has a lot more cut through than if a woman says it, in certain circumstances, particularly if they are talking about ensuring that there is gender equality in their business. So for those, I think, are a few ideas about how to start. And then another question from Andrew. What would you say in terms of firms adopting a responsible AI strategy as a mandatory approach to their firm's overarching strategy? I would say great idea, Andrew. And in fact, another role that I have is I chair a UK government body called LegalTech UK, and within that we have an ethics unit which I chair, and I know that we and many other entities in the UK are looking to establish really a not just standards but guidance around the ethical use of AI. And one of the things that we are doing at LegalTech UK is that we have a sandbox where we are trying to support businesses to develop their AI products in an ethical and regulatory compliant way. So in a sense, to have that hardwired into the coding, and I hope that will be increasingly the way of the future. So I think that's all the questions. I just have a quick check on the chat to see if there's any questions there. If anybody else has any other questions for me, happy to answer. So there is one here from Lise. To what extent would you say that it's possible to clean out bias in data? If we know women or people of colour are being underrepresented, can we compensate this? Or is the problem too sophisticated, too hidden, the layers of data to be addressed? I'm thinking that just removing women won't cut through the structural issues of underrepresentation. You are absolutely right. Luckily, there is quite a bit of work that's been undertaken at the moment in terms of levelling the data playing field, and some nice work around sort of reverse engineering. And this sort of isn't hugely sophisticated, but does start to help. So if we with a hiring algorithm, if we reverse the men and the women, let's say, in the hiring algorithm, and reverse engineer the data and see if there were different results. Now, if there were different results, then we need to go back into that data to understand, and into the algorithm to understand why that algorithm has applied that particular set of data and come up with different results for different genders if we reverse engineer that. So there are some technological techniques which can really support and assist us to ensure that the data that our algorithms are trained on is actually fair data. And this is where it gets really exciting, because not only could it be fair data, but it actually could be much fairer than the way that we undertake our decision making at the moment, with all the bias that we have within human decision making. An eternal optimist about this. I think it's really, really important that we raise awareness of these issues, and that's, you know, for all of us who are interested and involved in technology. We've got to make sure that tech is fair, that we raise awareness, that we are part of the solution, and that we could, as I say, end up with that world that is a fairer world for all of us, and one in which we can all succeed. So with that, knowing that it's now 9 o'clock, I am going to sign off. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll now put those links in the chat. Thank you.